This video is kindly sponsored by Aura Health, your all-in-one app for mental wellness and sleep. Salutations and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kidology and I make videos about everything and anything to do with modern society. I'm sure as you can see, I'm in a bit of a different setting. I have moved. I'm actually living for the first time in an apartment. I cannot believe it. I do not have to share a kitchen or a bathroom with anyone. I don't have to interact with a landlord. I am honestly, that is the most important thing. I do not have to interact with the landlord. But anyway, I have moved and it feels great. I'm still trying to create a bit of a setting around here. I've got my first bookcase. That is my own bookcase for the first time. I'm so excited. Putting my books on a bookcase was just, oh, wow. I felt like I'd made it. And as you can see, I kind of had to, I'm so sorry. I had to get a Golden Girls poster. I couldn't help myself. It was fate. I'm just going to put it down to fate. I just had to get one. I still haven't figured out how I'm going to somehow get it into the setting of my videos. I will somehow, so just bear with me. But I guarantee you're going to be seeing 4 old white women in all of my videos from this point onward. Prepare yourselves. So anyway, I also want to apologize for being away and very absent from my channel as of late. I had a procedure. I might talk about it in a video later on, but I'm still sort of processing everything that happened. So do forgive me for that, but thank you for your patience as always. Everybody is just so kind. The first comment that I got on my last video was, I hope that you are okay and you are doing fine. And it honestly brought me to tears because I thought, how on earth can people who I don't even know, like in real life, actually care about me and ask how I am and care more about my well-being than the content that I'm putting out? It was just so very touching. So I thank you so very much for your patience and for just always being you and considerate, and just thank you so much. But anyway, I'll stop rambling about my life and that little update on all my shenanigans and everything. I hope that you are doing okay. But of course, you are not here to hear about all of that. You are here to hear about TikTok's weird obsession with hashtag white boys. And I'm going to give you all of the juicy details on that. Now, if you go on TikTok for no less than 6 hours, you might notice something interesting in a little niche that I would call the relationship goals, dating preferences, love is love niche. And in this niche, there is a kind of badge of honor in openly declaring what kinds of racial groups you either find most attractive, or you mostly date, or even more importantly, would most like to date. And within this niche, there are a lot of POC girls and women who are very open about their obsession with white boys. You'll typically see this content associated with hashtag pasta and lobster, a reference to an infamous line from the viral Cali rap song Area Codes.
Got a white boy on my roster, he be feeding me pasta and lobster.
Other associated hashtags include hashtag soft life or hashtag princess treatment, suggesting that white men and boys are more capable of providing POC women with the lifestyle that is only fitting for a modern woman, deserving of all the material things and psychological needs that she consumes on social media.
A lot of white men ask me this question, if I would date a white guy. Yes, I would. Okay? Like, let me be really frank with you guys. I prefer white men. Oh my God. A melanated person is saying what the obvious is. I mean, like, look at all the races. Look at all the ethnicities. Look at all of them. Who is the man that is actually most coveted? It's not the black man. Okay, like, can we please, like, that is why Jesus is white. That is why Tarzan is white. It doesn't matter how many.
You know, we can all live in our fantasies. I, for one, like to believe that Jesus is an African-American man because I watch way too much Family Guy. But I really think we need to deep dive into the fetishization of Tarzan because there is a lot to unpack there. And you know what? Modern life is expensive, it is exhausting, and for most people, it is definitely not soft living. We're all meant to be comparing ourselves and our lives to one another. Having a white man as the ultimate status symbol is bound to enhance one's, I guess, social capital and standing, according to the psyche of many a POC TikToker in this niche. But importantly, this judgment swings just as radically the other way, giving especially POC women who date white men the side eye is a very common TikTok trope. Because as we know, shaming people has always worked out a hoot when it comes to establishing social cohesion, mutual respect, and fostering a sense of harmony between groups.
If you have a racial dating preference outside of your community, this side eye is for you.
Oh.
I don't care if you're a brother from the motherland, a goddess of Nubia, a man of the Mayflower, or a woman of Wonder Bread. You can't name one reason you exclusively date outside of your community that isn't a racial bias or stereotype. You can say you like brown skin, you can say you like men from Africa, but race is a social construct. So picking your favorite category out of a hierarchy built to oppress people is nasty work.
I mean, I can name one reason. If you grow up in a community that is exclusively one race, if you grow up away from your community because, I don't know, maybe you're adopted. I don't know, I'm just putting out a hypothesis. Maybe that can be an explanation as opposed to it being a bias. In the same way that people who grow up in their racial community tend to exclusively date people from their own racial community. The same can be said the other way. Now, from my perspective, there's nothing wrong with having dating preferences. In fact, having a preference is a foundational prerequisite of dating. In the world that is offline, most people's racial preferences actually rarely equates to cultural preferences, which tend to correlate quite evenly or in parallel with race. So I don't really see it as something really that important to write home about. If you're not interested in me because of my race and that rules me out from the get-go, I really have no interest in you. It's as simple as that, and we've both saved ourselves a lot of time. But as I said, preferences are a prerequisite of dating. And modern dating in an increasingly multicultural world where people are being raised on the internet more so than in the real world means that interracialism and interracial dating is inevitable. In fact, the representation, if not outright promotion, and in many cases I would say misrepresentation of interracial couples and relationships is everywhere, especially in advertising. But what is intriguing to me is how prevalent this seeming white boy love is online, and especially what it is being associated with. According to some, it isn't actually just a TikTok thing. In fact, it's an entire cultural phenomenon that is at the root of hampering the dating prospects of POC men and holding back non-white races. And importantly, it is a conspiracy that more and more POC women are intentionally collaborating in. And therefore, of course, the main culprits of everything that is wrong in the world, and especially in modern society. Women, specifically POC women. And you know, it is so bloody exhausting being blamed for everything all the time as a woman, as I'm sure so many of you can attest to and know. Modern life is tough, and it is increasingly tough for us all. And as I hinted to at the beginning of this video, life has been getting me a little bit down. And in all honesty, I would not have been able to have gotten through it without a little help from Aura Health. Aura Health is the world's largest mental wellness content library and community. Trusted by over 7 million people, Aura Health can basically be described as Spotify for your mind and soul. And what you'll find is a treasure trove of mental wellness content curated by mental wellness professionals, by clinical psychologists, meditation coaches, therapists, and even relaxation and sleep composers. I did not even know that that was a thing, and I am so happy that I now do, because soundscapes have become the essence of my existence. What I love about the Aura Health app is how personalized it is. Unlike other apps, Aura Health appreciates that one size really does not fit all, and it is so noticeable how the individual and personalized experience is prioritized over everything else. And as I'm sure you know, if you've been watching me for a while, I suffer with depression, and recently I've been pretty burnt out, pretty uninspired and disenchanted with the world and life in general. I'm also not a terribly spiritual person. I'm pretty pessimistic, so I am not in touch with my inner peace, let me tell you. But what I've been able to do is customize my Aura Health experience, so the content I'm recommended and I'm consuming is applicable to my needs and my preferences. I can follow coaches and content that really resonates with me, like for instance these two clinical psychologists whose CBT exercises have helped me so much lately. Being encouraged to write down my thoughts and to, more importantly, practice those thoughts, to practice new habits, has been incredibly helpful in keeping me sane and functioning these past few weeks. Or I can really feed my newfound obsession with soundscapes and ASMR storytelling. There's a French sleep and ASMR storyteller called the French Whisperer, and
hello everyone.
Damn, I listened to him telling me a story about the world of bees for 58 minutes, and those 58 minutes were probably the most relaxing 58 minutes of my day. That's another thing I really have liked about Aura Health. I can find new things that I never knew existed, that I never knew were a thing, that have actually helped me so much in relaxation and reducing stress. While I'm editing a video and usually stressing about it or something else, I can just scroll down my recommended, I can find a soundscape, I can choose the duration of the soundscape, and my life is bliss. And as I said, the attention to detail is so intricate on Aura Health that I can actually customize the video and sound effects playing in the background of the audio files and the content that I'm watching and listening to. And if I'm, say, in a rush somewhere, I can easily listen to a shorter video or a shorter soundscape. So if you'd like to join me in finding inner peace or improving your focus, personal healing, or dealing with the stresses and anxieties of everyday life, then you can get started on your mental wellness journey today with Aura Health. You can get started for free on Aura's website by using my unique link down in my description box. Now, this is a completely free trial, and the first 500 people to use my unique link get an exclusive 25% off their Aura Health subscription. Thank you so much to Aura Health for sponsoring today's video, and remember, the first 500 people to sign up using my link get 25% off their Aura Health subscription. And it's a completely free trial, so why not give it a go? But let's get back to this whole hashtag white boy obsession on TikTok and beyond that is seemingly ruining the dating prospects for POC men across the modern world. Now, what started this whole discourse is seemingly a 2014 OkCupid study, which showed two things. If you're a black man or woman or Asian man, you're going to have a tougher time getting a date on OkCupid. Now, these findings have made headlines ever since and have proved very influential in how young people navigate their prospects of dating when it comes to dating apps. And I would also say, just looking on TikTok, it has very much influenced how people see dating in general. If you scroll through TikTok, it feels as if having a racial preference is expected. It feels like it is encouraged, but at the same time, as if it is just being ridiculed to filth. If there is a POC woman who is, I guess, Americanized or westernized, there will be at least one comment saying, I bet you only date white guys. And this racial preference is always connected to some very general, unsubstantiated stereotypes about X racial group. And no other seems to be more popular at the moment than the so-called Oxford study relationship.
My Asian brothers, can we please stop commenting Oxford study? I promise you that Asian girl is not gonna break up with her white boyfriend just because you commented Oxford study. I like Asian girls, I get why you're upset. When I die, I'm gonna go to ABG heaven. I get it too. But these Asian girls don't need to hear you bitching about them being with white guys. I'm convinced that you guys think commenting Oxford study will make the girl go, oh my god, they're right, Oxford study. Let me go find an Asian guy to write instead. People have preferences. It's okay to like white guys, no matter how corny they actually are. There are plenty of girls out there in the world who want an Asian guy. Just because that one ABG on TikTok doesn't want an Asian guy, it doesn't matter. When you comment Oxford study, it's just proving these Asian girls right that Asian guys are immature. I get it, white guys are tall, they usually come from money, but they're corny as fuck, so like there's, it evens out. I understand it sucks getting beat up by guys who say you're on thin ice, young man, or it's gnarly, bro, but you will find your ABG, just be patient.
Asian and Asian American prejudice in the US is a fascinating phenomena to an outsider like me. And I don't mean fascinating in a positive way, I mean in an analytical way. Asians and Asian Americans are in no way a monolith, coming from hugely diverse and complex backgrounds and histories, yet are systematically reduced to being one single group, shoved into stereotypes that are universally applied to all. The stereotype that Asians and Asian Americans are higher academic achievers has even fed its way into university admissions processes. In fact, a whole industry of consultants and college admissions companies now exists in order to help Asian students appear less Asian in their applications to the likes of Harvard and Princeton. This is because appearing too Asian has proved itself a disadvantage when trying to get into one of the US's top and most prestigious institutions. And don't get me wrong, Asian and Asian Asian American stereotypes, like all stereotypes, have some truth to them. And typically the more positive, light-hearted ones ring more true than the bad ones. However, I would say that one Asian and Asian American stereotype that is increasingly having a negative impact is that East Asian, US-born or residing women are increasingly only dating white men. The negativity comes from the alleged impact that this is having on East Asian men, who, alongside other disgruntled POC and white men, are prone to commenting the now infamous phrase Oxford study under the TikToks of Asian women who show even a finger of their white significant other. There's even a TikTok channel entirely dedicated to documenting the Oxford study, and you'll find him in the comment section of many an East Asian female TikToker.
I'm ready to go on a first date at Teresi tonight, which is kind of iconic for me because it's one of my favorite restaurants in New York City, and you'll never guess where I found this man. Facebook dating. As you guys know, I've had some pretty bad luck finding men on the other dating apps where they turn out to be, how do I put this nicely, basura. And I realized that if you don't change your input, then you can't change your output. So I decided to look for some fresh talent in an arena that's never been explored before: Facebook dating. My favorite part about using Facebook dating so far, which is just part of the Facebook
If you're a young and attractive East Asian woman on TikTok, at some point, somebody is going to feel the entitled need to ask you, do you prefer white men? And even when an East Asian woman responds with, say, this.
Every time I post anything about dating, people are always in the comments being like, is he white? But no, I feel like I've dated a lot of different ethnicities actually, and I'm like pretty open-minded, but I feel like what I'm naturally attracted to is just Asian and Middle Eastern guys.
Her comment section will still look like this. Now, just to clarify, there is no such thing as an Oxford study that either proves or even just analyzes any such phenomena of East Asian women having some kind of preference for white men. In fact, such a study into women's or men's dating preferences would be impossible to universally apply. The latest study into Asian American women's racial dating preferences states the following. Although we found that certain sociocultural factors may affect racialized dating and physical attraction preferences, it is important to note that these factors may not affect all Asian American women, and that Asian American women have the agency and choice to determine their dating preferences and partners. Notably, our findings showed that Asian American women reported a stronger desire to date and physical attraction to Asian men compared to other racial groups of men. And this study actually contrasted with a past study whose sample of Asian American women actually showed a stronger preference for white men. It, like all studies, acknowledged that its findings are always going to be applicable to its specific sample. This latest study, for instance, recruited Asian American female college students from the Mid-Atlantic region, where there is a large Asian community. These kinds of studies into specifically racial preferences and dating preferences are always going to be context dependent. They really cannot be universally or representatively applied. This, however, doesn't matter because many a young man on TikTok believes that he knows better because of a 2010 study looking into early 2000s advertising. This 2010 study into advertising looked at normative assumptions of white male and Asian female relationships in early 2000s advertising. Let me emphasize advertising. And as I said earlier, there is a lot of misrepresentation and over promotion of interracial relationships and couples in advertising, which do not correlate at all effectively or well or accurately with reality. And the authors of this paper have actually commented on the recent virality of their paper, stating that they really don't see it as being relevant anymore due to the rapid changes in perceptions of especially Asian masculinity in the West, because of, most importantly, K-pop and Marvel films. Folks have to read the study, which is not necessarily about white men and Asian women in dating relationships, but rather about perceptions of romantic relationships between white men and Asian women. Basically, their paper is about what is literally happening on TikTok right now, where people perceive something stereotypical about Asian women and white men, rather than paying any attention to or having any real interest in what is actually going on at the individual and very personal level. So the Oxford study situation, which mind you isn't backed by any study whatsoever, goes something like this. And this doesn't just apply to Asian and Asian American women dating white men, but generically to POC women in general dating white men or outside of their race. Firstly, POC men and their allies will call POC women internally racist for dating outside of their race.
And whenever I see discourse on Asian women dating non-Asian,
stop blaming Asian men for your internalized racism, because what you're doing is you're holding every single Asian man accountable for the dysfunction that you grew up with. And it's not fair to the Asian men that are out here doing the work and that have identified the very same social issues that you take exception to. And respectfully, this is the kind of thing people work out in therapy. They examine how the trauma they experienced in their formative years shapes their current perception. And if you perceive a man's Asianness as a red flag, you very well may have horseshoed yourself into racism. I hope the irony of that is not lost on you. The idea that you might be so open-minded and so progressive, but yet don't date Asian men. And also, I don't like this idea of Asian men being painted as bad guys for wanting to understand society's aversion to them. Because it's not just Asian women, it's other groups as well. And it's no coincidence that there's an uptick in interest in Asian men when things like K-pop or anime get more popular. So it's worth entertaining the possibility that this aversion to Asian men is something else that's happening at the subconscious level. Remember, Stop Asian Hate includes Asian men.
Now, I don't know if it's just me, but I have never heard anybody accuse a man of having internalized racism nearly as readily nor as frequently as I hear this phrase being hurled at women of color. And again, I don't know if it's just me again, but it is always hurled as a way to sort of inadvertently shame them for dating white people or people not of their race. She is given the side eye or told that Marcus Garvey would be disappointed. Our people will never be free because a female stranger on the internet has decided to date another stranger who comes from a different racial group and cultural background. There is always the assumption placed on the POC female content creator that her dating a white man equates to her disliking Asian men, like all of them. That is precisely what this content creator does by conveniently cutting out what the original content creator actually says.
I see discourse on Asian women dating non-Asian.
Stop blaming Asian men for your internalized race.
I wish I could comment on the original video, but unfortunately it's now unavailable. See, I appreciate the second creator's intention to stand up for Asian men who are doing the work, but unfortunately the accusatory way that message is delivered to that original creator opens the floodgates for a bunch of vindicated Asian men who haven't done the enough work to go into her account and harass the shit out of her so that she goes private. She's a small creator. She had like 400 followers. You've got to be sensitive with the amount of power you leverage as someone with a greater following and the way you direct the energy.
Her personal experience is turned into political jargon and pop academic buzzwords because men are angry that she doesn't like them.
I don't know if you're also including me in these many Asian women you're referring to, but I never said anything about not liking Asian men. I have nothing against the Asian men, except for maybe the ones who are commenting under my videos, commenting Oxford study. Sure, there might be a handful of some Asian women who don't like Asian men because of this anti-Asian propaganda whatsoever, but it's such a small percentage that it has no effect on you or these desperate Asian men who are looking for an Asian woman. Like, the reason why I'm dating my boyfriend, it has nothing to do with his race or me turning against Asian men. It has to do with that he's just an amazing person and he treats me right. And I feel like the majority of Asian women who are dating non-Asian white men feel like that. They just want a person, a man who treats them right, and that's why they're dating that type of person. And has nothing to do with their race. And I'm not saying that Asian men can't treat women right. I'm just saying that if a Asian man so desperately wants to find an Asian woman, they might not be ready for a relationship. Like, to be honest, I don't understand people who just see an interracial couple and feel so offended by, like, why do you care so much? Why do you have to assume that I hate myself for being Asian just because I'm dating a non-Asian white boy?
And this leads to a second very important feature of the Oxford study trope. That is the complete dehumanization of the East Asian woman, both in the Oxford study and those promoting it, as well as in modern society in general. Online right now, I see a lot of of, I would say, especially white females trying to look like and emulate the physical appearance of the stereotypical wealthy East Asian woman. And specifically, I would say that this is mainly wealthy South Korean or Chinese woman, mainly because online at least, this woman is often exhibited as being the most desired ideal type of woman. She doesn't age, she has flawless skin, she is super skinny compared to Western standards, she has neotenous facial features. From trying to manifest East Asian physical features to the mainstream obsession with Douyin makeup looks, it is clear that wealthy East Asian female beauty standards are very much in vogue. And I think you can see how prevalent this stereotype is in people's rather visceral response to East Asian women who don't fit into this stereotype. I watch an Asian Canadian content creator called Tina Tran. She's hilarious. And watching her content has really shown me how being overweight as an East Asian woman can be a struggle due to the social pressures and the stringent beauty standards that are placed onto East Asian women. That is when it comes to not fitting into the beauty standard insofar as weight is concerned. There's also a weird little niche of East Asian women using a fat filter to promote clothes that make you look thinner. I don't really know whether this is rage bait or just an attempt to promote a new kind of garment, but just based on this kind of content and the sort of response that it receives from people online, it is clear that being overweight or not being thin enough is very taboo. And what I notice in all of these stereotypes about East Asian women is that everything that is deemed positive about being an East Asian woman, she's ageless, she's docile, she's feminine, she's cute, she's neotenous, entirely exists to dehumanize her. It necessarily has to completely remove any agency that she has as an individual. She is reduced to how she looks and to how well she is expected to play a role, which is never about who she actually is, but more so about who she generically ought to be. There's a rage bait comedy skit video by the YouTuber Churdleys and the East Asian influencer Lydia Ren, which feeds perfectly into the stereotype of East Asian woman.
Hey, me and my dog, we're wondering if you and your dog want to go on a date. I think it'll be fun. Yeah, and if you don't have a dog, we could share mine. She's so cute. Well, let me know.
This video, which is clearly just rage bait, feeds into every submissive trope and sexualized stereotype about East Asian women. And obviously, every single comment refers to the Oxford study. And this leads very well into my third point about the Oxford study and the plethora, if not millions of comments about the Oxford study that have been left underneath the videos of East Asian female content creators on TikTok. This really does feel like a campaign, almost as if it was an organized campaign. And it really is a part of, I would argue, very strongly, an organized campaign. MRAsians stands for Men's Rights Asians. And since most notably 2021, this online subculture has been very active in harassing and doxing East Asian and Asian women online who they perceive to be race traitors. Like many predominantly male-focused online community, they have their own lingo, which you can find featured on r/Asian identity. PAA stands for Progressive Asian Female and typically refers to an Asian woman who is progressive or liberal in her values. Uncle Chans, like Uncle Toms, are mentally colonized Asian men who are described as being sellouts. The female equivalent is an Annie Lu, an Auntie Tan, or a Mindy. And these Asian females are described as being just as toxic, self-hating, and self-serving as Chans, but they damage the Asian community in other ways. These women hold the belief that if they are with a white guy, they are by extension white, and to an extent, they do receive privilege by proxy. They use their white/non-Asian partners to gain influence and put them in positions of power above other Asians. They also endorse and perpetuate Asian stereotypes and tropes to get acceptance into non-Asian groups, mostly white, and throw Asians under the bus for their own benefit. They constantly find excuses to belittle Asian males and unconditionally glorify the emasculation of Asian males in the media or society. You know, it is always so uplifting to see POCs resorting to the same pejorative, derogatory, and discriminatory name-calling that we are apparently liberating ourselves from. Oh, the irony of the human experience. We have so much more in common than we'd like to believe. A fixation of many MRAsian groups online is that Western standards and Western society in general is intentionally emasculating Asian men. According to them, Asian men are predominantly portrayed as being introverted, as scrawny, as asexual. They are associated with stereotypes such as being effeminate or having smaller members. Many of them then refer to the perception underpinning the Oxford study, that is, the seeming rise in Asian women dating white men, and therefore the inference and the belief that Asian women therefore have a racial preference for white men over Asian men. And these MRAsians therefore see Asian women as being active accomplices in perpetuating their emasculation, and therefore, by default, by perpetuating white supremacy. Now, many of these men claim, importantly, that their issue isn't with WMAF relationships, but with Asian women looking down on or belittling Asian men in the process of dating white males. But it soon becomes very clear that an Asian woman simply posting a happy-go-lucky everyday TikTok video about her relationship, or even just featuring her white partner, is seen as an affront to many of these Asian men. Mind you, none of these men will even know the real reasons why she is dating the man or the men that she's dating, nor will they even know the real reasons why she has the liberal or progressive values that she has. According to them, she is clearly only dating a white male because of her colonized mindset. Take, for instance, this post about liberal Asian woman in the aftermath of the unaliving of George Floyd. Because obviously all Asian women are dating a new white guy every other week. Just being Asian influencer girls dating white guys means that you're basically saying we are not kowtowing to black people hard enough, like their white liberal masters, that makes us racist. Damn, the courage in having so many declarative statements and assertions about Asian influencer girls that you do not know, who are purely theoretical. My hat goes off to him. At least I can commend the confidence. Now, a number of public American Asian women have been harassed by members of MRAsian groups. I don't know if you can hear the church bells. I do apologize, but this is going to last for about half an hour, so bear with. Author Celeste Ng, who is married to a white man and has a biracial child, wrote a piece in The Cut about the harassment she and other famous Asian American women receive online for marrying non-Asians. One email from a huge fan states that her son will develop mental illness because of Celeste's supposed internalized self-hate. A lot of MRAsians always refer to the screenshot of a tweet that she made in 2015, which I think is very interesting, of the differing perspectives of men and women, POC men and women, when it comes to this issue. Celeste has addressed this 2015 tweet, she's apologized for it, and she's spoken about educating and unlearning stereotypes about Asian men. It is a very interesting discussion into how much we learn and understand about the world is rarely context dependent. It isn't so much self-hatred that made Asian men unattractive as potential partners to Ng, in as much as she never grew up around Asians that weren't her cousins. And this rings true for many people in interracial relationships, whether they be romantic ones or platonic ones. Context, more so than self-hatred, is a main driving force. And of course, this isn't an excuse for context sometimes leading people down the road of prejudice, but it is an explanation. The new and far more progressive context that Ng finds herself in has clearly influenced her response since that tweet, has clearly influenced her views and, importantly, her values since that tweet. Again, proving that context is pretty much everything. I read a post on a thread about Asian American feminist Jen Fang, who, just for context, is married to a black man, declares that, quote, she probably dated a village of white guys before she dated the black guy to be edgy and further her SJW career. Anything but an Asian man, right? Do these loos not realize that they hate half of their own race? And something noticeable about all these fruitful posts and these hateful emails is that most of them have have their roots in r/Asian identity. And as I said, this Pan-Asian subreddit is known to not just post the social medias of Asian and Asian American women, but also to dox some of them. And most of these doxers feel justified in their doxing because of their co-option of pop academic critical race theories in support of their personal grievances with Asian women. Because, say, Asian females and white male relationships in the United States are 3 times more common than any other interracial pairing, there must clearly be a lot of self-hatred plaguing the minds of stereotyped, dehumanized, and brainwashed Asian women. Doxing and harassing them is clearly the way to snap them out of their handmaid's tale. But of course, I do not believe that that is what is actually going on. So why, as one Reddit user inquires, are Asian female and white male relationships in the United States 3 times more common than any other interracial pairing? So let's clarify this a little bit. The rise in intermarriage among Asians and Hispanics is pretty organically connected to the growth in these immigrant populations since the 1980s. As Pew Research findings show, for newly married Hispanics and Asians, the likelihood of intermarriage is closely related to whether they were born in the US or abroad. By 2055, Asians are projected to become the largest immigrant group to the United States, surpassing Hispanics. And Asians are also projected to make up 38% of the US foreign-born population by 2065. And I think what is also important to note in all of this is that European, that is white European, and Asian, that is specifically East Asian immigrants, are perceived far more positively than all other immigrant groups to the US. Basically, the present and future of the United States is very heavily East Asian influenced. And therefore, inevitably and pretty naturally, intermarriage is going to happen, especially when younger white Americans perceive East Asian immigrants positively due to perceived higher levels of assimilation. And I say perceived assimilation because when it comes to assimilation in the West, what people actually care about, even though they profess to care about cultural assimilation, what people really care about is whether you are Christian or not, or whether you are going to be a threat to Christianity and Christian values or not. And most importantly, I would say how similarly you look to us. It is quite clear when it comes to religion and looks why East Asians and white Europeans are perceived more positively in the US relative to other immigrant groups. And I do want to emphasize that I am saying relatively and not in absolute terms. There is a lot of prejudice, a lot of racism towards these 2 groups of immigrants to the US. Please do not get me wrong on that point. And so it isn't so much that Asian women are rejecting Asian men in favor of white men, in as much as it is socioeconomic and cultural factors colliding in very interesting and new ways that, as stated, are very much dependent on whether somebody was born in the US or not. That is, whether an immigrant was born in the US or not. Because the vast majority of young Asian women and men who you see marrying non-Asians are predominantly born in the US. And this is across the board the case when you see interracial relationships on TikTok. And just on this point, there is definitely a mismatch between the expectations that the Asian men posting on r/Asian identity and commenting Oxford study have of modern Asian women and the way that the modern world is. Irrespective of race, it is very clear with declining marriage rates and with fewer and fewer young people getting into long-term relationships that modern women have definitely developed far more organically with the times, and that a noticeable percentage of modern men really haven't. And by a noticeable percentage, I can mean as little as like 1%. 1% to me is noticeable enough. This is most definitely not the case for the vast majority of modern men, but I think that there is a good enough proportion of men, especially online, who have most definitely not developed as organically with the times relative to modern women. In short, a noteworthy enough portion of modern men are still very interested in and dependent on traditional marriage in a way that most modern women are just not. Traditional marriage is largely a family affair. It's a family arrangement. It's an institution with very patriarchal roots and expectations, especially when it comes to the role of a woman, who necessarily has to be dependent on the traditional traditional marriage for financial security and mere survival for the traditional, not the modern marriage, to actually be worth it in the long term. Important distinction between modern marriage and traditional marriage in this sense. They are quite different things. And the fact that more and more women are choosing to opt out of these traditional expectations of marriage, or are choosing not to opt in the first place, is very telling of how things have changed. It is very telling of how marriage, still very much entrenched in its traditional expectations and traditional roles, is clearly something that modern, increasingly self-sufficient and educated modern women are not opting into, particularly in their early 20s going into their early 30s. And this conflict and mismatch between traditional expectations of marriage and the increasing self-sufficiency and education and independence of modern women is a noticeable phenomena in many an East Asian country right now and in the modern Western world. And this is a noticeable contributory factor to declining birth rates and greater expectational divides between the sexes. For most racial groups in the United States, men are less likely than women to be in a relationship. However, Asian and white adults are the most likely to be partnered relative to Hispanics and African Americans. So, when you consider all of this, it seems very understandable to me why Asian female and white male relationships in the United States are 3 times more likely and more common than any other interracial pairing. It isn't so much a fetish or even a racial preference based on stereotypes, in as much as it is a cultural and demographic development that has come about pretty organically. And this is made especially understandable when we consider rapid rates of immigration since the 1980s, as well as growing and rapidly growing, that is, multiculturalism in the modern world. But kid, all of this about immigration and multiculturalism really doesn't answer why modern women love white boys so much online. And this is noticeably a very big and hot topic on TikTok when it comes to this particular niche.
I find it so interesting when people of color say that they can't date within their own race because it reminds them of insert family member. Because white people never seem to have this problem. In the past, I've dated white women, and trust me, I've heard my fair share of problematic dating preferences from white women, but not once have I ever heard them say, I couldn't date a white guy because they remind me of my dad or their brother. Not once, never heard that. I have heard a lot of suspect reasons as to why they prefer Asian men, but it's never really come from an aversion from dating white men, you know? But every once in a while, you'll see a POC creator get on here and talk about their experience dating white people, which I'm not saying there's anything wrong with, but it almost always starts from this perspective of, oh, I could never date someone from within my own ethnicity or from my own race because they remind me of, again, insert family member.
Now, I think I can somewhat provide an answer for this. I think that there's far more traditional masculine expectations placed on ethnic and immigrant men than I see being placed as readily onto white Western men. And these traditional expectations typically have to do with the man's parents and with his wider family, with success and with marriage. In short, not achieving the goals and expectations of this trifecta means that you are deemed a failure as a man. And I'd say that typically at least 2 of the 3 goals of these 3 points of success and what makes you a real man have to be achieved by an ethnic or an immigrant man before he's 25. And that really isn't a lot of time to achieve family honor, to get married, and to achieve success. And I think that because of this, many a white Western man, especially as he is portrayed on TikTok and social media, is able to be far more individualistic, far more self-expressive, and is in a far greater position to pursue self-discovery. And I do think that on social media, at least, because white men aren't held to such rigid expectations of masculinity relative to ethnic and immigrant men, they do tend to appear interesting and perhaps far more compatible with far more liberal and progressive modern women. It is noteworthy that young women, irrespective of their race, tend to be far more liberal, far more progressively minded than young men. When I, for instance, see black men online, I see a far smaller window for their expression, their self-expression as men. They have to be incredibly masculine and macho, and they are represented as such. When I see Asian men, whether it be South Asian or East Asian men, again, there is a very narrow window for masculinity to be expressed through. And this window typically has a great deal to do with upholding very rigid family expectations, very rigid gender expectations, as well as upholding patriarchal norms and customs. And I would definitely say that in an immigrant setting, these expectations, these customs and patriarchal traditions are not so desirable by immigrant women, who are typically more educated and are also more likely to be in employment. I've personally experienced this when dating specifically African immigrants in the UK. 99% of these men want to be breadwinners, they are very family oriented, and they very much see the role of a woman as being that of a very traditional role, being in the home, having children and raising children. When I was a wee lass in South Africa, this most definitely suited me fine, and this was ultimately what I saw my future as being. However, I've immigrated to the UK. I now am very educated. I am now self-sufficient and in employment. That is not the future that I see for myself. Whenever I see men, both historically and presently, getting in touch with their more feminine or alternative side, it is always, not just predominantly, but I would even argue only white men. And I would argue that the recent modern, specifically white girl and woman obsession with K-pop has something to do with this new cohort of K-pop male stars, aesthetically at least, being very in touch with a kind of alternative masculine softness that is currently all the rage. Male skincare and grooming is very much in. Caring about fashion is very, very in. Being skinny and lanky is no longer considered as much of a downside or an unattractive attribute for a man to have. The only demographic of men that I really don't see being under the same amount of social pressure when it comes to upholding family lineage, when it comes to family honor and upholding expectations of masculine success, are white men. And mind you, this most definitely is not all white men. I do think that this is far more a social media phenomena than it is a real world or non-virtual world phenomena. And of course, again, context matters, but I do think being a progressive white man is far more socially acceptable than being a progressive and liberal and soft POC man. It is no wonder to me why the social media and broader media depiction of white men as being more self-expressive, as being more willing to pursue their passions as artists, musicians, or surfers, with no extended family burden or pressure to be one particular kind of masculine, are therefore, at least online, seen as more desirable potential partners. That is, if we're going to be broad and generic about it. And this very much applies to what I see many POC women who choose to date white men over men of their own race or ethnicity, referring to as escaping the culture when choosing to do so. It isn't so much that they're unattracted to POC men, in as much as unattracted to the cultural expectations and norms which the POC men they've dated embody, which don't really align to the woman's far more modern values.
It's funny how, as an Asian woman in America who's with a white guy but has dated and been in relationships with men and women from different cultures, the moment I post anything with my white male partner, the comments that I get from strangers who know nothing about me, usually men, are, "That's internalized racism. Of course your boyfriend is white. Why don't you date your own people?" I even got a comment that was like, "Oh, I have a crush on you, but I bet you're with a white guy." As if the only reason that I'm not with you is because you're not white and not because you think backwards. I'm the first person to say that as a Filipino, I know for a fact that we grew up thinking that white people were the shit. The whiter you are, the better you are, the more attractive you are. That's true, and we should acknowledge that. However, first and foremost, men are not entitled to women of their own race. White men are not stealing Asian women from Asian men. The concept of stealing assumes ownership. No one owns Asian women or any human. No one has rights or first dibs over anyone. This isn't the Eras Tour, bitch. You don't get first access to people. The second thing is that we need to remember that when people say Asian men this, or Filipino men that, or Korean men this, people usually mean the culture, not necessarily individual people. So let's not generalize all men, but to men, let's consider where women are coming from when they say these things. Someone on TikTok had said this, but I feel like when women of color date outside of their race, they do it sometimes to
escape some form of toxic masculinity that they know too well from within their culture. But of course, toxic masculinity exists in probably all cultures. It just looks different from what you grew up with. So really, when people date outside of their race on purpose, sometimes it's to date outside of their culture.
And one Reddit comment put it quite interestingly. I most definitely do not agree with all of it, but I do think that some of the premise really rings true here. The bar is set lower for white men. That's what white male privilege is. It's the result of blah blah blah. We're taught to falsely believe that white men are inherently more sophisticated, progressive, just better. And they also have the privilege to be judged as individuals. We knowingly and unconsciously enable this. It is sad, but there's not much more to it. And although I can somewhat sympathize with this argument, I really can't, just because of how ready and eager many of these individuals are to completely disregard the individuality of, say, Asian women, of POC women, of just women in general. Having negative experiences with family members, the people you are most meant to trust, the people who are mostly meant to look after you. Having negative experiences when dating will inevitably influence how one navigates dating and relationships in their future. And for people to be shamed for learning from their negative experiences, for people to protect themselves from potentially going through those experiences again, really doesn't address the real issue at play. It really isn't white supremacy or white worship when you actually listen to what many of these individual POC women have to say about their relationships or about their preferences. And of course, inevitably, there's outliers everywhere.
That is why Tarzan is white.
But thankfully, typically outliers are the exception, even if they are the most vocal. I would hazard to guess that most of the men commenting Oxford study under the TikToks of Asian woman would not be willing to accept her for who she really and individually is. There is a clear mismatch in values that would deem any such potential relationship between them. The East Asian influencer is yet again reduced to her looks and her features. And because she isn't conforming, she is the one who is seemingly internally racist and self-hating. And just another brief example of how I think a lot of men, not just in this niche, but just in general when it comes to dating and relationships, really don't care about what is actually going on or what women actually desire, what women are actually saying, and care more so about what they think women are actually saying or what women actually mean. There's a TikTok of a white male lip-singing Carly's area codes and a black woman reacting to it. And the comments were very telling into what these predominantly black women found attractive in this white male. What the ladies loved were his hands. His manicured, soft, ringed up and nail-painted hands. They loved his eye contact. They loved that it was as if he was rapping directly to them. Basically, they loved his individuality and his seeming sensitivity directed solely toward them. And importantly, not one single comment made reference to him being white or them having a preference for white guys. Their only comparisons were to white male celebrities, which again had everything just to do with how he looked and nothing to do with comparing how he looked to other men, specifically to POC men. And I think it's very difficult for some POC men, with all the aforementioned pressures, the cultural pressures, as well as the extensive cultural negativity associated with POC men's masculinity, to either cultivate or to be encouraged to cultivate a truly authentic, self-expressive sense of self, especially in a modern world that seems very detrimentally against it. I think with all of this, too many people are projecting their personal insecurities and their personal grievances onto other people and are oftentimes using, I think, sort of very generic theoretical justifications for it. As the saying goes, misery loves company. And I think when a lot of people see joy and happiness on the internet, it is easier to try and tear people down than to try and understand it or to not project your own situation into it. I know it's not my business what people do in their personal lives. Yes, it is none of your business. But it feels sad to see so many Asian females reject their own culture, especially among my own family and friends. As I grow older, Asian guys just keep getting better looking, and white guys just look really pale and old next to their Asian wives. A lot of the Asian females I know also married loser white males who don't work or can't get jobs. One of my cousins had to pay alimony to her loser ex-husband because he never worked. All the Asian females I know that married Asian males have good husbands that work hard and look good for their age. I don't understand the love for white males, especially if it's only about looks. They peak in their teens teens, their early 20s, and then they age rapidly, balding by 30. And this entire post is about how Asian males seemingly hate how Asian females feel the need to tear down Asian males while they are dating out. And yet the entire post and its responses are disgruntled men tearing down white men for aging poorly, for being jobless, or not being as attractive as their Asian partner. And therefore, in a roundabout way, tearing down Asian women for their choices. This post and so many like it are indicative of why many liberal Asian women are unattracted not to Asian men per se, but to men who sit online and whine about them begrudgingly and stereotypically while simultaneously complaining and demanding that they be treated like respected individuals. And on top of that, when you consider that women place more emphasis on personality than on physical attractiveness in long-term dating and in long-term relationships, it is no real wonder why, across the globe, women are typically more physically attractive than their long-term male partners. I think time and time again, we just see in the example of Hollywood that true attractiveness is really not physical. Your looks are really not going to sustain a relationship. Oftentimes, if not all the time, reality is far more complex.
I don't know if you guys have the same For You pages I do, but lately I've just been seeing a lot of back and forth from Asian women and Asian men, and it typically goes like this. Like the Asian woman is like, oh yeah, like never catch me dating an Asian man, and then the Asian man always claps back and goes like, okay, we don't really want you anyways. I'm like, yeah, I get that. And I empathize a lot with Asian men, and I understand how difficult it is to find love out there, especially when the world makes you feel so undesired. And this is for men who are in queer spaces as well. There's some very harmful stereotypes that exist about Asian men, like being overly academic, unathletic, socially unskilled, but basically a lot of Asian men are granted the same amount of masculinity as men from other races. But I just wanted to bring an observation. A lot of the times, I'm going back to the whole back and forth with Asian men and Asian women on TikTok. A lot of women who voice their disdain for Asian men tend to be more plus-sized and more thick. That's what I've noticed. And I'm not saying that that gives you a free pass to dehumanize Asian men, but you have to admit that there's a pattern here. Growing up, I cannot even describe the amount of fat phobia that I experienced from the Asian community, because fat phobia runs deep in Asia. An Asian woman's desirability has basically almost always hinged on her thinness, and it's something that has existed in Asia long before colonization. But I truly don't know a lot of Asian men who are willing to unlearn fat phobia or willing to acknowledge the hurt that they put on bigger Asian women. And I'm sure a lot of plus-size Asian women can agree with me on this, but there are a lot of us who actively seek relationships with men who are not Asian as a result of the severe fat phobia and overall dehumanization that they face while they were in an Asian community at the hands of Asian men. This is just food for thought. Just something that Asian men can keep in mind if they do want to support us Asian women.
I'm only a Wasian, that is a biracial white and Asian individual, and not a full Asian, but I have gotten similar criticism before for marrying a white person. The reality was, no Asian man was seemingly interested in me. I have never gotten asked out by one ever in my 30-something years on this planet, and was rejected every time I asked. I hear many Asian women saying the same thing. They were too fat, not Asian enough, etc., and never approached by any Asian men, so they date out. Same goes with non-Asian women. Many who like Asian men are never approached by them, so they assume they're not wanted by them. And yes, I can definitely attest to this other side of the coin that a lot of men online ignore. Personally, more white men and women have asked me out than black men and women. And I've been told by at least 4 black men that I have dated that I am not black enough, that I'm not really black. And I've also been told by 2 white men that I dated that I wasn't really black enough. And forgive me, but why would any woman, or why would I want to spend the rest of my life with somebody who doesn't think I'm enough? I also think that again, large enough proportion of modern men think that they're going to find the woman of their dreams by sitting on dating apps. They also seem to think that trial and error, that rejection, or that cultivating a sense of individuality and self-identity is somehow either just not worth the effort or not what real men do. On the contrary, there is nothing more attractive to a woman, I'm quite sure, than a man who is confidently different and himself. Most Asian men need to do a better job of immersing themselves deeper into Asian culture, and by going to events and doing things where there are lots of Asian girls. Attend more family events too. You need to walk up to them and talk to all the women. woman. I find that a lot of Asian men tend to become depressed and isolated when they can't get a woman, thus losing out on any chance of meeting an Asian woman because they are inside all day depressed. You can't really be a shy introvert. You have to put yourself out there. And I think this, you've got to put yourself out there, applies across the board. I mean, we are living in modern societies where individuality is key for many young people, especially for many young women who historically were never allowed individuality. And these modern societies are also increasingly and rapidly multicultural and intermixed. And it isn't so much that cultures are being erased, in as much as they are necessarily being redefined, are being re-examined and interpreted in different ways. And that is just the inevitability of being historical mortal beings. It is, for instance, inevitable that 1 in 7 modern newlyweds are interracial or interethnic. And it is also inevitable that the majority of Americans are in support or approve of intermarriage. And I think that rather than being afraid of change, we should try to accept the new opportunities it offers. Because just from this whole discourse, it really is clear that there are too many children and young adults growing up in a seemingly progressive world, which is proving itself to be not nearly as progressive, as understanding, as tolerant as it likes to portray itself as. I have personally hated growing up not being black enough. I have hated not being accepted because of existential realities beyond my control. And it saddens me to note that there are people, and are increasingly going to be people and children, that are already being or are constantly being shamed for loving who they love, for not being enough of something, for merely trying to exist with the hand they've been dealt. But I'd love to hear from you. What do you think about intermarriage? What do you think about the cultural implications of intermarriage? What do you think about this seeming obsession online with white boys? And also, of course, I'd love to hear your personal experiences and your personal thoughts on this, so please feel free to share. And also, don't forget to try out Aura Health, where the first 500 people who use my link get an exclusive 25% off their subscription. Thank you so very much for watching this video, and I'll see all of you very, very soon in the next one.